The hospital room was cold and quiet. Richard lay in the bed, his eyes half closed, pretending to be weak and dying. But he was watching everything. He was listening to every word. Outside his room, his daughter Michelle stood with her brother Thomas. They were whispering, but Richard could hear them clearly. They were not talking about him. They were talking about his money. How long does he have? Michelle asked the lawyer on her phone. Her voice was calm, almost excited. And when can we access the accounts? Hello family, welcome back. Please take a moment to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. It truly means a lot to us. Don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. So sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Thomas nodded beside her, already counting numbers in his head. His expensive watch caught the light as he checked the time. He had a flight to catch. He didn't want to stay longer than necessary. Richard felt something twist inside his chest. Not pain from sickness. Pain from the truth. His own children were waiting for him to die. But then he heard something else. A soft sound. Someone crying. He turned his head slightly and saw her. Sarah. His housekeeper. She was sitting in the chair beside his bed, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook as she sobbed quietly, trying not to make noise. She had been there for 3 days. She never went home. She never asked for anything. She just sat there holding his hand, praying for him to get better. Richard had hired Sarah 2 years ago. She was a widow with a young son. She worked hard every day, cleaning his huge mansion without complaint. He barely noticed her. To him, she was just part of the furniture. Just another person doing a job. But now, lying in this bed, he saw something different. He saw the only person in his life who actually cared if he lived or died. And that broke something inside him. Something he thought was already dead. Sarah wiped her tears and looked at him. Please don't leave, she whispered. Please stay. The world still needs you. Richard wanted to speak. He wanted to tell her the truth. But he couldn't. Not yet. Because this was all a test. A cruel, desperate test to find out who in his life was real. He had faked this illness. He had lied to everyone. And now he was discovering something he never expected. But what would happen when Sarah found out the truth? Would she ever forgive him? 3 months earlier, Richard Montgomery sat alone in his study. The room was filled with expensive paintings and leather-bound books. But it felt empty. Cold. Like everything else in his life. He was 63 years old and worth billions of dollars. He owned hotels, companies, and buildings in almost every major city. But he had no one. No real friends. No family who loved him for who he was. His wife had died 7 years ago. She was the only person who knew him when he had nothing. When they lived in a tiny apartment and ate cheap food. When love was more important than money. After she died, Richard changed. He became cold and suspicious. He stopped trusting people. Everyone who smiled at him seemed fake. Everyone who called him seemed to want something. His children only visited twice a year. And when they did, they always needed money. A business investment. A new house. A vacation. Always something with a price tag attached. His business partners pretended to respect him, but he knew they talked behind his back. His old friends disappeared when his investments lost money. Nobody stayed when things got hard. Richard spent years testing people in small ways. He would pretend to be broke and see who stopped calling. He would ask for help and see who made excuses. Everyone failed. Everyone disappointed him. And that's when he decided to create the ultimate test. He would fake a terminal illness. He would pretend to be dying. And he would watch carefully to see who stayed and who started counting his money. He called his doctor, Andrew, a man he had known for 30 years. At first, Andrew refused. This is wrong, he said. You're playing with people's emotions. But Richard was persuasive. He always got what he wanted. He convinced Andrew that this was necessary. That he needed to protect himself from vultures. That he needed to know the truth before he died for real. Andrew finally agreed, but only with one condition. If the stress caused real health problems, they would stop immediately. Richard agreed. He thought he could control everything. He thought he knew exactly what would happen. But he was wrong. Sarah arrived at work that morning like always. She came at 6 o'clock, made Richard's coffee the way he liked it, and set it on his desk. She cleaned the 14-bedroom mansion quietly and efficiently. She never complained. She never asked for more money. Richard barely looked at her. He didn't know she had a 17-year-old son named David. He didn't know her husband had died in a construction accident 3 years ago. He didn't know she worked 2 other jobs just to pay rent. He didn't know that she was about to become the most important person in his life. The collapse happened on a Tuesday morning. Richard was sitting at the dining table reading the newspaper. He took a sip of his coffee, then suddenly clutched his chest. He knocked over the cup and fell forward onto the floor. It was all an act, but it looked very real. Sarah was in the kitchen washing dishes. She heard the crash and the sound of the cup breaking. She ran into the dining room and found Richard on the floor, gasping for air. His face was twisted like he was in terrible pain. "Mr. Montgomery," she screamed. She dropped to her knees beside him and pressed her hands on his chest. "Please stay with me. Please don't go." Her hands were shaking. Tears poured down her face. She didn't think about anything except saving him. She didn't think about her job or her paycheck. She just thought about the man who was suffering in front of her. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Dr. Andrew was already there, playing his part perfectly. He shouted medical terms and checked Richard's pulse. He looked very serious and worried. They lifted Richard onto a stretcher and rushed him to St. Catherine's Hospital. It was a private hospital where rich people went when they were sick. Sarah rode in the ambulance with him. She held his hand the whole way. She whispered prayers under her breath, begging God to save him. Her voice trembled with fear. At the hospital, the news spread quickly. Michelle arrived first, her high heels clicking loudly on the shiny floors. She wore an expensive dress and dark sunglasses. Her face looked concerned, but her eyes were cold. Thomas flew in from Los Angeles the next day. He brought his wife with him. They stood in the hallway whispering about lawyers and bank accounts and offshore money. Richard's business partners sent flowers and cards. The messages were full of sympathy, but they felt empty and fake. But Sarah never left the hospital. She slept in an uncomfortable chair beside Richard's bed. She survived on bad coffee and crackers from the vending machine. She read Bible verses to him, even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. She wiped his forehead with a cold cloth when he sweated during the night. She talked to him softly, telling him stories about her son, about her dreams, about the small things that made her happy. When the doctors announced that Richard only had a few weeks to live, Sarah broke down in the hallway. She sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe. A nurse had to help her sit down. Richard, lying in that bed with his eyes barely open, heard everything. He saw everything. And for the first time in many years he felt something strange. He felt ashamed. He had created this test to prove that people were selfish and fake. But Sarah was proving him wrong. She was showing him a kindness he didn't deserve. A love that asked for nothing in return. His children visited in shifts. But they never stayed long. They always had somewhere else to be. And they always ended up talking about the will, the estate, the foundation, the money. Richard heard every word. And slowly the truth was crushing him. Days passed like a slow nightmare. Richard continued his performance, speaking in a weak voice, moving slowly, looking like a man who had given up on life. Michelle and Thomas visited every day, but only for short periods. They stood outside his room, speaking in hushed voices. They thought Richard couldn't hear them, but he heard every single word. "Has he updated the will recently?" Michelle asked the lawyer over the phone. "We need to make sure everything is in order." Thomas checked his watch constantly. He was impatient. Waiting. "How much longer do the doctors think?" he asked Andrew one afternoon. "I need to get back to Los Angeles soon." They asked pointed questions about timelines. About mental competency. About whether Richard was still able to make legal decisions. Their eyes were hungry. Their patience was thin. Meanwhile, Sarah sat quietly beside Richard's bed. She held his hand gently and told him stories about her son David. She talked about how smart he was, how kind, how he wanted to become a doctor someday. "He's everything to me," she said softly, her voice filled with hope and sadness. "I just want to give him a better life than I had. I want him to have opportunities." She never asked Richard for anything. Not money. Not help. Not even recognition. She just talked to him like he was a person, not a bank account. And that's when Richard realized something that gutted him completely. The only person in his entire life who truly cared whether he lived or died was the one person he had never really seen. But then, one night, everything changed. It was late, past midnight. Richard was lying in bed, pretending to sleep. He heard footsteps in the hallway outside his room. It was Sarah. She was talking on her phone, her voice low and trembling. Richard strained to hear. His heart began to beat faster. "I can't keep this secret anymore," Sarah whispered into the phone. Her voice sounded desperate. "It's eating me alive. I have to tell someone. I have to do the right thing." Richard's heart, the one he had been pretending was failing, actually skipped a beat. His mind raced with terrible thoughts. Was she talking about him? Had she figured out the test? Was she planning to expose him? To sell his story to the newspapers? To take advantage of his weakness? Every ounce of trust he had been building crumbled instantly. The old suspicion flooded back into his heart, cold and familiar, like an old friend returning. He wanted to confront her. He wanted to demand answers. But he couldn't. Not without breaking the illusion. Not without revealing that he had been lying all along. So he waited in the darkness, his mind spinning with doubt and fear. And the next morning he made a decision that would change everything. He decided to take the test one step further. He decided to die. Dr. Andrew was furious when Richard told him the plan. They were alone in the hospital room, speaking in whispers so no one would hear. "You're going too far," Andrew hissed, his face red with anger. "This isn't a game anymore, Richard. You're playing with people's emotions. You're playing with Sarah's heart." But Richard was determined. His jaw was set. His eyes were hard. "I need to know," he said coldly. "I need to see what she does when she thinks I'm gone. When there's no reward. No patik. No audience watching." Andrew shook his head in disbelief. "This is cruel. This is wrong." "Just do it," Richard commanded. "One more test. That's all I need." So they staged it. Early the next morning, Dr. Andrew walked into the waiting room where Sarah had been sleeping in a chair. His face was heavy with sadness. "He's gone," Andrew said quietly. "I'm so sorry." Sarah's scream echoed through the entire hospital. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. She collapsed to the floor, her body shaking violently with sobs. 2 nurses had to help her to a chair. She refused to leave. 4 hours she sat outside Richard's room, staring at the closed door. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked like someone had ripped her heart from her chest. When they finally let her see the body, she stood at the foot of the bed. Tears streamed down her face like rivers. She whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mr. Montgomery. I hope you're at peace now." Richard was watching from a hidden camera in another room. He saw everything. And his chest tightened with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Not from a fake heart condition. From guilt. From shame. From the crushing realization of what he had done. He had been so obsessed with proving people were rotten that he had tortured the one person who deserved none of it. But he couldn't stop now. He had to see what happened next. Sarah went back to the mansion alone. The family had already told her they didn't need her services anymore. But she went anyway. She began cleaning the house, preparing it for Richard's memorial service. She spent hours polishing the floors until they shined. She arranged fresh flowers in every room. She set up chairs in the garden for the service. She used her own money to buy candles and a guest book. She did all of this while grieving. While exhausted. While Michelle and Thomas argued loudly about money in the very room she was cleaning. "You're just the help," Michelle snapped at her one afternoon. "You have no place organizing anything. This is family business." Sarah simply nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just kept working, making everything perfect for a man who had never appreciated her. Meanwhile, Richard's lawyers began reading the will. And that's when the real feeding frenzy began. Michelle and Thomas fought over every single thing. Every piece of art. Every stock option. Every property. They accused each other of being manipulative. Of being the favorite child. Of scheming with their father behind the other's back. Old business partners started calling, suddenly remembering loans and deals. Old friends emerged from nowhere, claiming Richard owed them money. It was disgusting. A circus of human greed. And through it all, Sarah stayed quiet, attended the memorial service standing in the back, and then disappeared. No one noticed. No one cared. 3 days after his supposed death, Richard sat alone in a dark room. His head of security brought him a recording. It was the phone call Sarah had made. The one that made him doubt her. The one that made him stage his own death. "You need to hear the full conversation," the security guard said, handing him the device. Richard pressed play. His hands were shaking. Sarah's voice came through the speaker, trembling and emotional. "I can't keep this secret anymore," she said. "It's eating me alive." Then another voice spoke. It was her pastor. "What secret, Sarah? You can tell me." Sarah took a deep breath. David got accepted to a prestigious university. They offered him a scholarship. But he needs a reference letter from someone important. Someone who can vouch for his character. "That's wonderful news," the pastor said. "But I was too proud to ask Mr. Montgomery while he was alive," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "I was too afraid of overstepping. Of seeming opportunistic. And now he's dying and I feel so guilty. I kept this opportunity a secret because I didn't want him to think I was using him. And now I might miss my chance to give my son a better life." Richard stopped the recording. His hands dropped to his lap. his vision blurred with tears. Sarah hadn't been talking about him at all. She had been talking about her son. About a mother's desperate hope to give her child opportunities she never had. About guilt for not asking for help. About the quiet heartbreak of wanting to do the right thing. That was the secret she couldn't keep. Not betrayal. Not schemes. Just love. Just sacrifice. Just the aching heart of a good woman. Richard Montgomery sat in that dark room and wept. He wept for the first time since his wife died. He wept for his cruelty. For his blindness. For all the years he wasted building walls instead of bridges. The next morning Richard walked through the front door of his mansion. Alive. Healthy. Very much not dead. The staff screamed. Michelle dropped her phone and it shattered on the marble floor. Thomas stumbled backward, his face turning white as paper. But Richard didn't look at any of them. He walked straight through the house, past the relatives scrambling for explanations, past the lawyers shouting about legality and ethics. He walked to the garden. Sarah was there, kneeling by the flower beds, planting roses. She looked up and saw him. She froze. Her face went pale. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then quietly Richard said, "I need to tell you the truth." And he did. He told her everything. The fake illness. The test. The cameras. The suspicion. The desperate need to know if anyone in his life was real. He told her about the phone call he misunderstood. About the shame eating him alive. About the fact that she, a woman he barely acknowledged, had shown him more humanity than his own family had in decades. Sarah listened, her face unreadable. When he finished, she stood up, brushed the dirt off her knees and looked him in the eye. "You didn't have to test me," she said softly. "You just had to ask." Richard expected anger. He expected her to curse him and walk away. But Sarah just sighed deeply. "I hope you found what you were looking for, Mr. Montgomery." She turned to leave. "Wait," Richard said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 envelopes. "This is a reference letter for David. And this is a check for his full tuition. 4 years plus living expenses, plus whatever he needs to chase every dream." Sarah stared at the envelopes, her hands trembling. "I can't accept this." "You already earned it," Richard said, his voice breaking. "Please. Let me do this one decent thing." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She took the envelopes and pressed them to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she added, "But you have to promise me something. Stop testing people. Start trusting them." Richard nodded, unable to speak. 3 months later, Richard collapsed again. This time it was real. A massive heart attack. He died on the way to the hospital. His will shocked everyone. He left his children modest trusts with a note that said, "Earn the rest." He left 70% of his business profits to charity. And he left Sarah half his estate with one condition: turn the mansion into a foundation for single mothers and their children. Sarah kept her promise. She transformed that cold, lonely mansion into a home filled with hope. And every year, on the anniversary of Richard's death, she plants roses in the garden and whispers a prayer. Not for his money. For his legacy, but for the man who learned that his greatest wealth wasn't what he owned. It was who stayed when he had nothing left to give. Richard spent his whole life building walls, and it took a woman he barely noticed to show him that walls don't protect you. They just keep you alone. In the end, Sarah's kindness outlived him. It outlasted his empire. It turned a monument to loneliness into a sanctuary of hope. We've come to the end of today's story, and I hope it touched your heart. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe for more powerful and inspiring stories. See you in the next one.